So this class came about, well, before that, I should introduce myself. Hello, my name is Odette, Odette La Tricoteuse de Saint-Denis. I've been active in the Midrealm for about 7 years. Prior to that, I have lived in a handful of other kingdoms, moved around a bit. But when I got here, I started getting a bit more interested in the ANS competition side of the SCA. So here is where I started entering the Kingdom ANS competition. And also, this is where I started to learn more about sort of the back end of the Kingdom Arts and Sciences and learn about how the fair was run and how it's organized and set up and scheduled. So at this point, I am on fair staff. I am currently the tally room coordinator, and I'm also a deputy to the Kingdom Minister of Arts and Sciences. So I have a bit of experience within this. Okay. So the class itself came about because we had folks getting curious about judging. Some folks weren't sure that they were qualified to be a judge, or were worried they wouldn't be able to do it. So I wanted to sort of dispel some of the mystery and make it a bit more approachable, convince folks that yes, you too can be a judge, and help folks just sort of understand what all goes into the process and the system. So with the fair itself, basically, you register as a judge, you go, you judge some entries, you give some feedback, and that's kind of the base of it. So you get to show up and be judgy McJudgy pants, I think, as I put in the class handout or the class summary. Now, a better process to think about when we're going through this, you're going to want to register ahead of the event. Okay, typically we do scheduling so that we can make sure we have enough judges for each entry. So it's best if judges register at least a week before the fair. Okay, so we have at least some notice of who's going to be there, and also what sort of skill sets they have. So when you register as a judge within the system, you're asked to sort of check off or indicate your areas of interest and your areas of expertise, sort of the things that you know. Then you get paired up with one or more entries the day of. On the day you show up, you go ahead and do the entries, do the judging, see the entries, talk with the entrants about their particular entries themselves, provide them some good feedback, actionable feedback, give some scores, and hand all of that paperwork into the tally room. So that's kind of the broad overview of it. And we'll look at each of those stages as we go through this process. Okay. So who can judge? Anybody. Okay. You do not need to be a laurel. Frankly, you don't have to have any ANS awards. You do need to have skill sets within some arts or science. Okay, so you need to know your stuff in at least one area, but that doesn't necessarily always correlate with the award system in the SCA. So if you do not have a laurel or an evergreen or such, don't think that disqualifies you. You can still go in and do the judging. So for judging itself, like I say, you don't need to be a laurel. Want to really highlight that because some folks do get worried about it. Also, judging is done typically in panels of 3. So you'll have the entrant paired with 3 judges, all of whom are collectively judging the piece. Okay, so sometimes you'll find that you and the other 2 judges have sort of tangential interests and expertise to the specific entry, but between the 3 of you, you've got sort of the base needed to understand what the entrant is doing. Okay. If you are new to judging, or you are new to judging in the Midrealm and you are nervous about judging at your first fair, you can also request the ability to shadow judge. So that is an option as well. Okay. Now, one of the questions I often get asked is why? why should people judge? Okay, particularly at the A&S Fair, there's a bit of work to doing the A&S Fair. Okay, there's some effort involved in preparing for it. There's registering in advance. It does tie you up for a chunk of time during the day. So it's a bit of a responsibility, and it's a bit of an acceptance that you are obligating yourself to do some things. But I also find it's one of the most inspirational things I do in the SCA. I go to these events, I get to see all of these really cool things that people are doing, and people are spending their time and their effort and their heart and energy in these entries. And some of them are amazing. They are just amazing to see. And I love that. I come home from any fair I have been at completely inspired and wanting to make all the things and do all the cool stuff. And it is so uplifting. It is awesome. I really love that. So it's a great way of inspiring yourself, inspiring others that you talk with. It's a good way to learn. Say you're going to a fair to judge one entry, you can also look at the other entries, and you might learn bits and pieces about some other art or some other science that you haven't done yourself. Maybe there's somebody in your home group that's trying to learn something about that, and you can get some contact information for that person in your home group and help people make connections. So there's a lot of ways to be able to get those connections, learn more, get inspired, and give back as well. Give back to the A&S community as a whole. The act of judging at the A&S Fair provides information to the artisans and helps as a whole elevate the arts and sciences within the kingdom. Just helps everybody improve, and it incremental improvement over time, and we'll get to some pretty serious heights. Yeah. Okay. So the how to judge. So this is where we go into the process of signing up and talking about the logistics involved. Okay. So before the fair, within the Arts and Sciences Fair system, those who have accounts within it can go into those accounts and indicate their expertise area, their areas of interest, their areas of willingness to judge. And that sort of presets your account so that when you go in and say, yes, I am going to be at the fair and I am happy and willing to judge, those settings are already in the system. Now you can do them at the same time that you register to attend the fair, but you can also do it ahead of time as well. In the system, at least until recently, those settings generally carried forward from year to year. So once you set them, say last year, they would ideally be there this year as well. But perhaps since last year, you've taken on a new art, or you've learned a different technique that might give you understanding of another area that you could then indicate in your account you've got the skill set to judge. Okay. So getting that account set up, letting the fair staff know basically what you can and will judge. And then about 2 weeks before the fair, I say about 2 weeks, usually we'll accept folks down to 1 week, but 2 weeks gives us a better idea of if we need to scramble and hunt down some extra folks to volunteer. Register, go into the fair system, the fair portal, and say, yes, I am attending the fair and I am willing to judge. Okay. As mentioned, if you are interested in shadow judging, this would be a time to indicate that you do want to shadow judge. Okay. Now, typically midweek before the fair, the staff gets together and starts drawing up all of the matchings or the pairs. So that's, Tuesday or Wednesday before the fair. It'll be a big old call where we'll get together and go, okay, we have these entries. We need to set up the schedule for those and find the judges for them. And so that's a bit of an effort to make sure we've got 3 judges for each entry, that we're not overtaxing any individual judge. We generally try to have each judge no more than 2, maybe 3, if we know they're very experienced and very fast at judging, because we don't want somebody tied up all day doing judging. Okay. Sometimes we have to extrapolate a little bit based on the areas of expertise someone has indicated as well. Depending on the exact set of entries we have, in the handout, I sort of mentioned, say you've indicated, you know a lot about early period embroidery, and we have an entry on, say, black work. You might find yourself as a judge for that black work entry, because the techniques at least are somewhat similar, that there should be some carryover knowledge between the two. How many? Oh yeah, and I received a question in chat asking, how many entries does Midrealm have? Arwen, I'm not sure I fully understand the question. How many entries?
As in how many things do you have to judge at a Kingdom ANS?
Oh, okay. You may judge only 1, you might judge 2, you may judge 3.
No, I'm asking how many entries do you guys have at a typical arts and science competition at the Kingdom level? Like, is it 100? I mean, Avocal, we'd be lucky if we got 20. So, like, you know, so okay. Just looking for scale here, that's all.
Fair, that's a very good question. We are in a bit of flux with the fair system in Midrealm at the moment, because we are this year for the first time not doing regional fairs. Previously, we did regional fairs across our 5 regions, and then the scores that met a certain level from there were invited to go to Kingdom.
Yep, I remember that from '92 when I participated at a regional. So yeah.
Yeah, we're now getting rid of the regionals, so we only have the Kingdom Fair at this point. We have in the past had anywhere from about 70 to 100 entries. So okay. It's a fair number. It's a lot of moving pieces. We're uncertain of exactly how many we're going to get this year, it being just past COVID and there being no regionals. We're not sure what kind of impact that's going to have. So it could be really light, it could be really heavy. Yeah, cool. Okay. So yeah, depending on how many entries, that meeting that we have midweek before the fair could be really short. It could take a while, because if we do have a large number of entries, there's a lot of massaging of names and people to figure out within all of those groups. Yeah. Okay. So after that meeting, the fair coordinator will sort of collate all of that information into a readable format, and then the fair coordinator will send out messages to all of the entrants and all of the judges with their preliminary assignments. Okay, so we give everybody sort of this is the preliminary schedule we have set for the Saturday. And if there are any concerns with this schedule, let us know now. Okay. And that allows folks to review sort of who they've got, what entries they're judging, who those entrants are. If there's any conflict of interest, you can speak up at that point. Say you've been assigned to judge the entry of somebody who is your student. You may want to cite a conflict of interest and ask to have a different judge swapped in for that. Yeah. Okay. Then the morning of the fair, we have a sign-in. I think previously it's usually closed by about 10 or 10:30 in the morning. And we ask that anybody who's entering or judging go through gate, then come over to the sign-in table for the fair and let us know that you were there. Because that way we know for sure that we've got you on site, and that your position and the obligations we have set for you for the day have been at least filled with your presence. Okay. Shortly after that sign-in table closes, we usually have a judges and entrance meeting. And that's where the fair staff will go over any last-minute details for the fair, and they'll also give any updates to the schedule if perhaps there have been some swaps in those preliminary assignments. That will be communicated during that particular judges meeting. We will usually hand out the final judging assignments at the end of that meeting, quite often on little cards so that you have a physical thing to carry with you. It helps remember and know where you're supposed to be. One of the fun details in the Midrealm is that we span more than one time zone. So when you are at these meetings and when you are checking in, it is good to confirm what time zone you are in and what time zone all of the times are listed in. For example, rum today, every time is listed in Eastern time zone, and I live in Central. So I'm having to mentally adjust everything for myself. Okay. Now, typically after that judges meeting, you've got your card or cards for the judges, the entries that you were judging. And there'll be a little bit of a break between the end of that meeting and the start of judging. So this is a chance to do a bit of a bio break, maybe grab a bit of bite to eat. Sometimes you can get a preliminary eyeball onto the entries that you are going to be judging. I will often try and grab a copy of the documentation if I can. Some of our artisans, myself included, sometimes have rather lengthy documentation. And the judging that we do is face-to-face, and it's only 1 hour. That's not a whole lot of time. So if you see that there's a fairly hefty amount of documentation sitting at an entry, if you can borrow a copy until it's time to judge, it can help to pre-read some of that if you've got the time availability to do it. Yeah. Okay. Now, during the judge's time slot itself, okay, we often sort of ask folks to split it up a little bit, with a little bit of time for the entrant to sort of present a bit, a little bit of time for the judges to ask questions. We often try and have some time toward the end of that time slot to allow the judges just some quiet time to do all of their commentary write-ups. If there's time for that, I find sometimes I have to extend my commentary write-ups into a little bit into the next time slot. So hopefully I'm not always back-to-back judging time slots. Now, when it comes to that 1 hour time slot, if you have already read the documentation, you can sort of dig in and start talking with the entrant about what it is that they're presenting or demonstrating, or what item they've made, and ask them to talk about it or ask questions you have for clarification. We do, at least previously, we've done a mix of handwritten or electronic forms. Judges could pick to use one or the other. So if you are handwriting out all of your judging commentary, there are parts of the form that have to be filled out with just standard information, names, entry number, all of that. So that's sometimes good to start filling out just prior or while the other judges are reading the rest of the documentation. Then you sort of examine the item or watch the performance and ask questions. Within the Midrealm, the evidence supporting the entry is both written and verbal. So anything that the entrant provides verbally is considered part of their documentation. So that is important to remember when you are doing the judging. Sometimes the written portion might be a little bit sparse, but if you can ask questions and draw additional information out of the entrant, you may be able to find out more about what their sources are, or how they've come up with different methods and why they've made different decisions within their project. And that can help fill out some of the criteria rubric as you're trying to determine an actual score for the entry. Okay. Yeah. So it's important to keep the criteria in mind while you're going through all of this. So I should have mentioned it sooner, but it is helpful to reference the criteria basically as soon as you get your assignment. So if you know that you're going to be judging a made object, go and grab the made object rubric criteria and take a look at it and sort of read through it. So you've got a rough idea of how all of those different categories are referenced and sort of the general feel of how you progress through them. Okay. And one of the things to remember, we've recently rolled out some new rubrics. These are, I think the best term I've heard describing them is that they are additive. So you can sort of think of it as you get more information from the entrant, as you read more details in the documentation, as you learn more during this time slot about this entry, it can help increase the score. Okay, so it can add to your understanding of what the entry was as you go through and when you're taking a look at these different rubrics. Okay. Now, I do try and get some of my commentary started while I'm in that time slot, and I would recommend that. I find for myself, when I am starting to write up comments for the artist, I realize as I'm writing that there are additional details that might be worth requesting from them. So it's a good way of making sure that you've covered all of the holes that might exist in your mind about that entry. And the comments themselves. So there's a lot of talk about doing different things like compliment sandwiches or constructive criticism. I like to think of it as actionable feedback, okay? So rather than sort of saying like this is an entry that's just amazing, I love it. You can say, I really liked your use of this technique, or we chatted about this reference. I think it might help your future efforts. So provide feedback that sort of gives the entrant something that they can do to improve. It's, yeah, to me, it functionally fits in my brain better than the other descriptions for good feedback. But I know some folks do like the compliment sandwich. Certainly it doesn't hurt to provide some good with the bad if you have to provide some, this could use a bit of work type of feedback. But ideally, instead of saying this could use a bit of work, you're saying, I think this would help, and give a specific this. Okay. And I've got bolded here. Something to remember when you are a judge is that a lot of these entrants have spent hours, months, years working on these arts, working on these different projects. They've put a lot of heart and soul into them. And it's only fair that as judges, we match their effort and we do our best to give them good feedback and to help them succeed and improve and move forward. Okay, so you've done your time slot, you've asked the questions you've started at least filling out some of your commentary. Once that time slot ends, unfortunately, time must move forward, and you or one of the other judges may have another time slot assignment they have to go to next. So after you finish that one time slot for the entry, try and complete the commentary as quickly as you can. And I don't mean like rush through it, but I mean, don't wait to fill it out. If you can continue on it immediately following, that's best, because it's still fresh in your mind. So you're not gonna forget details by waiting and then coming back to it. Okay. Also, the folks in the tally room like to get those judging sheets sooner than later, because we don't like to have to hunt folks down for them. Okay. So we have a new set of criteria that are being used within the Midrealm. I have a link shown here in the handout, and I should be able to get a link to share in the chat as well. Okay, and this is where we have the different rubrics for our new criteria. And that is itty bitty tiny font. Zoom. Okay, so I'm not entirely sure how readable that is for folks, but this is our made objects rubric that I've just pulled up on the screen. And we can see we've got several different categories: supporting evidence, ingenuity, complexity, methods, materials, and execution. And each one of those varies from 1 through 6, well, 1 through 5. So they go from sort of, this project has met the I guess, basics up through at a score of 5. This project has brought in an extensive amount of research. They've brought in a lot of different sort of understanding of the technology that was in the period. Basically, for a 5, it's very comprehensive, it's very in-depth, it's very deep in thought and analysis, and provides a substantial amount of context around said entry. Similar to Countess Serena's keynote this morning, it answers all of the questions: the who, what, when, where, why, how, and answers all of those in depth. Yeah. Okay. So in the handout, I sort of run through the different categories just to give a rough idea of them. Supporting evidence. Actually, before I start describing those, I did get a question wondering if there was going to be more room for comments, or if we're going to be using the backs of pages for all our commentary on entries. So in the old fair forms we had, we quite often ended up having to write on the back of the page, just because if you're providing good feedback, that takes more than a few words, and the old forms didn't leave a whole lot of space. I don't think we have yet finalized exactly what these forms are going to look like printed. I am hoping we will have at least a little bit more space, because being able to write in there while you're seeing the topic described, the category is helpful as you're doing your judging and your scoring. So I will chat with the fair staff about that. I know there is also a movement to encourage electronic judging. So we'll have within the fair system, at least previously, and I assume we're going to try for this year as well, where the judges could enter their commentary and their scores via the fair portal online, and that allowed them to type up and do the scoring all within that fair portal, which is great for folks like me, where my handwriting starts to deteriorate quite badly once I start writing in a rushed manner. If I'm in a hurry, it gets harder to read. So being able to type means I can type as fast as I want, and people can still read it. Yay! So there is intent and hope to have electronic judging readily available at the fair. So I think we'll be encouraging that. There may still be some extra paper needed for folks who are doing the written judging, though. Okay. Any other questions about that? We've had a question about having remote judging or remote entrant done by Zoom format before COVID. I know that we typically do face-to-face judging for Midrealm Fair. Previously, we have allowed entrants to send their entries and have someone set up their display for them at the fair, and the judges would simply judge the entry as presented. We haven't yet done anything where we've had a remote judge or the remote entrant actually connect via Zoom or some other platform. Depending on what COVID does over the next little while, we may have to investigate it. But I think we are hoping we can return to in-person judging. Hoping, if COVID lets us. Okay. Any other questions before I sort of dive into the different categories? Okay. Oh. The comment asking about remote mentioned it's because of their distances. She's from Avocal, and I started playing in Avocal, and yeah, there are some hella drives there. Very, very long drives. Yeah. Okay. So within the new criteria, it's broken down into a handful of different sections. The first one listed is supporting evidence. And this is basically talking about how the artisan, how the person doing the entry, how they're supporting what their project is. What kind of sources are they using? What kind of references? How much effort and depth have they gone to dig out and find all of this information and pull it together and bring it together for this particular entry? For folks who have done the previous judging in Midrealm, this would be pretty similar to our research and documentation category before. Yeah. The next one is ingenuity. Okay. And this is all about sort of demonstrating the understanding, the analysis, the pulling the information out from what those sources provided, and then combining that together to inform your project. Okay, so there may be some experimentation, there may be some thought processes that do analysis on, well, if we have A and B, but we don't have C, then perhaps that means that the project would have had to be done this way, because without C, we can't do it this other way. So it gets into the thinking and I associate it, literally I call it out, I call it the mental load of the project. Okay. The thinking and decision making. Okay. Next one we've got is complexity. Okay. And this is going to be about the intent of the entry. Okay. The complexity that the entry as intended should represent. Okay. So this isn't necessarily about how well that has been realized, but it is about the complexity and difficulty and the quantity of skills and techniques all being brought together within this project. Okay. For those familiar with our prior scoring system, it's somewhat similar to the scope section. Next, we have methods. And basically, this is going to be speaking directly to your methods. What sort of methods did you use? How closely related are those to the methods used in period? Did you make any differences? Why did you make differences between the method used in period and the method you used now? And so that'll be a sort of a process information from the artisan, discussion with them about what they did, why they made the decisions they made during the project about those different methods. We have materials as well. This is going to be about the physical materials. So are they using wool versus silk? Are they using linen fabric instead of cotton? I'm a textile junkie, so my brain immediately goes to textile type things. Are they using period instruments or their closest facsimiles for a performance? So this will sort of speak to the materials. It is worth calling out. So both methods and materials within the midrealm, we have it spelled out in the rules, both can be modified, adjusted for safety, offensive content, or to avoid prohibitive cost. Now, you do want the entrant to explain those. So they can say, you know, I didn't want to use gold leaf in this illumination because frankly, that's kind of pricey. So instead, I did this other thing to simulate it. In period, it would have been done this way. This is how I did it here. So yes, those substitutions are allowed, but yes, we also want the entrant to be able to explain why they made the substitution and why they chose that particular substitution. So thinking back to some of my textiles work, if somebody can't afford a particular silk for a project, what have they chosen to substitute it with? Why did they choose, say, that particular type of fiber instead of another? Is it because they behave similar, look similar, that sort of thing? Okay. And then the last section is execution. And that's kind of the pair with complexity. So complexity is about the intent of the project. Execution is how well it's been done, how well it's been realized. Okay, so have they demonstrated that they have the skills to do these complex, detailed, varying techniques, skills within this project? Okay. So those are the categories for made objects and for performance. So the categories are the same across both of those. For research papers or research entries, the categories change up a little bit just because the ones for made objects and for performance don't quite translate as well to research papers. And I can sort of go through those a little bit more quickly. This is more about how well have they done their research, put it all together, presented it, and provided it in a way that can be consumed. So supporting evidence, similar, it's about their research, their understanding, depth, breadth of all of the various resources they can pull on for understanding this particular topic. Thesis, it's basically how well they have a defined thesis within their research paper, how well they support it. Okay, so once you've done your research, you then have to actually go ahead and use that research to support what your thesis is. So that has to be done within the research paper. Methods, this is going to be about your research methodology. And I am not a researcher by trade, so I assume there are a variety of different research methodologies that you can talk about or dive into for this. Citation, okay. This is going to be about having a standard citation style that is consistent, comprehensive, that you have a bibliography that has been annotated, that basically you're providing within those citations the information that people need to be able to understand where you're drawing your information from. Writing skill. If we're writing a research paper, being able to write in a way that is understood is rather important. Okay. So the judging sheet itself, actually, step back before I do that. Any questions about the criteria before we move on? I know we've got new criteria this year, so there might be some questions from folks about it. Okay, cool. A judging sheet overview. Like I said earlier to a question, we have sort of the judging criteria set out and laid out now, but I'm not sure if those are quite yet in their formal, final, how we're going to print them out for people to fill them in format yet. I'll chat with Sarai about that and make sure. But generally, within the judging sheets, we're going to have some header type information where you'll provide your name, your contact information as well, because we want the entrant to be able to follow up if you've got commentary that makes suggestions and perhaps they want to clarify some of those suggestions. So you'll include your information, you'll include the entries information as well, because that helps us sort everything. And then there will be sections for each of those different criteria sections. So for the supporting evidence, for the methods, for the ingenuity, there'll be a separate section for each. And you'll be able to fill out your commentary by hand or electronically. Yeah, we do like electronically. It kind of makes life easier. Previously, like someone did say, if your commentary filled up more space than we had on the front of the page, you generally continued on the back. You can also request just additional blank paper. Maybe it's easier for you if you can still see the front of the page while you're writing things down. So blank pages can also be added in. Yeah. So all of that being said, judging, it's kind of a cool, fun thing to do. It's very, very inspirational. It's hopefully a little bit demystified for folks. I'm hoping folks are going to be ready and willing to judge come May at our Kingdom Fair. Yeah. Okay. And with that, we've kind of reached the end of the handout. Are there any additional questions or comments that folks would like to share?
Just a comment on research papers.
Mm-hmm.
If you're judging a research paper, think about it that it's their body of work. It's not supporting documentation. So we need to spend the time to take a look at all their sources, look at all the research and everything else. I've been judged for a couple of research papers I've had where people were reading it on the day of, when in reality, even though I provided it a month ahead of time, it's because it's not super documentation. It's the item that the person is entering. So and that's why it kind of has its, normally in all the kingdoms, it has its own little rubric and a whole concept from that perspective, because it is completely different from that perspective. So just a warning on that, because it can cause issues, because really you want someone to go through and look at this, now you're looking at the quality of the references, the quality of the, and everything else, right? And very much like you said, if you could grab the documentation early before doing this is even more important, because there's no item normally that goes with it. So that's just something to remember about papers that have caused issues, right?
Fair. I should interject. I didn't actually mention it earlier in all of this. Our research papers also have slightly different deadlines, and generally they are submitted, I think it's about a month before the fair itself. Correct. And that's to give us time to assign judges specific to those research entries and give them time to do some of that legwork.
Yeah. So if you are asked on the day of an event, I've had people do that to me. So it's like, could you judge this research paper? And it's like, from readability and practicality and some other things, but I won't be able to do the level of work I would need to do for a research paper. Now, other documentation that's large, that's a different challenge. But it's just something for papers that if you are asked to judge a paper, take the time to do that. Like you usually get it about 2 weeks ahead of time, right? So
Yeah. So I think having those slightly different timelines for research papers help. But yeah, it is something to keep in mind that if you are interested in judging research entries, that may be useful to let the judging staff know, the FAIR staff, because it is also kind of handled a little bit different for how we do assignments.
Right.
Yep.
And I just being slightly different from that perspective. So as a person who writes those research papers, so like, I mean, I've been on both sides of that, both judged as well as judging. So
Fair.
Yeah.
Okay. We also have a question in the chat asking about made object entries. How much weight should we give to doing photos provided by the entrant, basically process photos that they take while they're working on things? And from my perspective, photos are awesome for showing your process. So if you're doing made objects and you're trying to describe what you're doing, sometimes you can take a photo and it's gonna save you paragraphs of describing that process. So process photos are awesome. I love them. And as a judge, those photos would be considered part of the documentation. So they should speak to possibly materials as well as methods. Yeah. Okay. And we've got a couple hands raised. I think Dare or Derry from Avical.
Dara.
Dara, my bad.
No problem. Sort of following on from Arwen, there's also an issue in my mind when people are doing sort of experimental research papers. So you've got somebody like myself who is making objects to test drive them as opposed to doing them as an artifact. And the item, people are so used to judging made objects that they go to the made object, judge it, score it very poorly because it's not a pretty thing. Where the point of the presentation, the entry, is the research behind it. So I think it needs to be very careful that though just because there's an object there, we don't put those into the made object category, that they do remain in the research side.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, as an entrant, the entrant would indicate that they are entering a research entry. And so it would be treated a little differently because of those deadlines being slightly differently, and the judges being assigned a little ahead of time. Now, I do think that for experimental research, that would speak very much to the research methodology that is being presented within that research paper.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And then Tommaso has a hand raised as well.
Oh, thank you for not making me Japanese first or Spanish. I get a lot of Tomas, and every once in a while I get a Tomaso. What I have to keep in mind is that if we say 20 wonderful things about an entry and we say one thing negatively that is negative, that's what they're going to focus on. So especially if you have a criticism, make sure you figure out in a way that it's not devastating to the entrant, which can be hard to do because, oh, I love this, love this. Oh, what were you thinking here? You have to think about how to do that. Otherwise, we're Simon. Oh, this Tommaso said horrible things about me. I said 400 great things about you. I made one criticism, and every one of us is, I do performance, and people will say things. Oh, what about? And the one person who is critical is what you focus on, and that's human. But we have to keep that in mind as we're giving feedback to people, to be sure that they're not going to think we're horrible people because we told them, hey, there's this great book. Oh my God, they hated my entry because I didn't read this one book. Which is
Fair.
human, but we have to be aware of it.
Yeah, that is a good thing to keep in mind. And it's part of sort of, I guess, matching their effort and making sure that you're giving them the respect of having put in that time and effort. And I do like the idea of the actionable commentary, because that, even if it does sort of say this is an area that can improve, it at least provides an avenue through which that improvement can be made. Yeah, okay. And we had a question come in on chat, so I'm going to hit that first before the next hand up. We're running close to the time we need to wrap up, so we've only got time for another couple questions, I think. But one of the questions in chat is, while this hasn't happened to me, I was curious if an entrant got their judging back and had discrepancies with whatever a judge provided. How would the best way to handle a situation like that? For example, if an entrant is newer or feels graded more harshly. We do have within the rules laid out a sort of a review option. So if an entrant feels that their judging was inappropriate, that their score wasn't quite what it should have been, they are allowed to sort of ask for a review, and depending on how that review finds things within the review, that can lead to several different actions, up to and including rejudging the assignment, rejudging the entry. Yeah, so there are mechanisms within the FAIR rules for bringing that up to the FAIR coordinator. Okay. And then Arwen, you had your hand raised as well.
Yeah, so when we're giving, so I'll just make two quick comments. When we're giving negative feedback, I always try to give it in a positive way, saying, I would really like to see more about this, and although it's negative, it's in a positive light, because what we're trying to do is say, I'd like to see more about this. I'm really excited to hear more about that. Here are some suggestions, or contact me afterwards. And as for judging improperly, that actually happened to me. My papers were judged as items instead of as papers. And so that would completely skew everything from that perspective. And so it all got rejudged, but it's a matter of just going to the coordinator and saying, this doesn't work. And the coordinator was quite happy because it was me rather than a new person. But if a new person that you know of is concerned about it, please empower them to reach out with your help as a judge or a person who, because anybody who's in this class is someone interested in helping the arts and science. So help them find their way to the right people to talk to, right? So.
Yep, yeah. And for reference, the right people to talk to are introduced at that entrance and judges meeting at the start of the day as well. Cool. And then I think we've got time for one more question. Kathleen Hack.
Two things. First, thank you for teaching this class. And then second, I am in the agriculture division. And I just wanted to say, don't be afraid to get creative when you're trying to find judges for the agriculture division. It's a little underappreciated, and they tend to bring people in for the equestrian. I had a judge that was a master gardener and the best judge and had great feedback. So, be creative.
Awesome. Thank you for that feedback. We do sort of try and do pairings like that. If we can't get like exact matches within skill sets, we try to get at least tangential or related adjacent kind of skill sets. Yeah. Okay. Well, we about time to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for coming, and very much appreciated the commentary and your attention and questions.